Hi, it's Molly again from Technocamps. You're about to watch the video to accompany the Using Selection in Computer Programs workbook and activities. However, if you haven't done so already, please take some time to first watch the introductory video to this Introduction to Programming Principles activity pack so you're clear on what these resources are about. Second, watch the Getting Familiar with Block-Based Editors and the Algorithms video, which introduces you to the Scratch, MakeCode for Microbit and LEGO Mindstorms editors, and importantly teaches you how to write basic computer programs in all three. Finally, take some time to attempt the activities in the workbook before watching this video. Provided you've done all three of these things, we're ready to start. At some point in the Using Selection in Computer Programs workbook, there is a task for you to complete a flowchart, which includes an if and else statement in Scratch. Did you manage to do it? If you did, then your flowchart should look something like this. So we have our start terminal block, which goes into the first step, which is an input, green flag clicked. And then step 2, we have our condition, is spacebar clicked. This condition will be evaluated in the next step. And this is where we have our decision. So this condition is either evaluated as being true, which means that step 4 could be option 1, where we output a move 10 steps action followed by a say hello for 2 seconds. Or this condition here could be evaluated as false, in which case we follow a different option of steps, which is to play the sound meow until done and change costume. If your flowchart looks something like this, did you then manage to execute this program in the Scratch editor? If you did, that's fantastic, well done. But if you didn't quite manage it, don't worry, I'm here to show you how to do it now, and you'll be able to do the next one by yourself. We've established in the workbook that an if statement is a decision in a computer program. If statements start with a condition. In our case, is the spacebar being clicked? The condition is then evaluated as being either true, yes, the spacebar is being clicked, or false, no, the spacebar is not being clicked. The program then follows a set of instructions depending on the evaluation of the state of the condition. So let's open up a new project in Scratch and try to create this computer program. So we go to Create and open up a new project. So we'll just exit this. The first thing we need is to add a sprite and a backdrop. So I'm going to stick with my cat sprite for now, and I'm just going to add a backdrop here, and I'm going to go for a winter backdrop. The first thing we need in our program, according to the flowchart that we've created, is an event block which says when green flag clicked. So let's go back into Scratch. So we go into events and we drag in this event block here which says when the green flag is clicked. I'm just going to magnify that a little bit. There we go. So we have our when green flag clicked event block. Following on from this, let's see what we need. We have the input green flag, that's good. And then we go straight into our if and else statement. So if we go back into Scratch, in which category are we going to find the if and else statement block? Well, if you watch the block-based editors video, you'll know that we find this block in the control category of the blocks menu. Let's just think about that for a second. If you add a decision-making block, like an if and else statement, into a program, it's like adding an element of control in the program, isn't it? Because we're controlling what happens next as a result of the evaluation of a condition. So it kind of makes sense that this if and else statement block belongs in the control category. So let's go into the control category. And we can see something that resembles what we want to say in our program. We can see this block here which says if blank, then blank, else blank. So let's drag that into our program below the event block. So clearly we need to fill these blank spaces in our if and else block. So if we go back to our flow diagram, what do we want to fill these spaces with? So what we want our program to say is, if the spacebar is clicked, do one thing, else do something different. So in Scratch, remember we use blocks to build up our computer programs. So somewhere we're going to find a block or a set of blocks that will match what we want to say. So where are we going to find a block to insert into this first blank space, which says space key pressed? If you remember from the previous videos and workbook, we spoke about inputs and outputs. That's data which is received and sent out by a computer. Now, pressing the space key on our keyboards is an input, isn't it? Because it's our action on the outside world of pressing the spacebar key is information that is received by a computer. Can you remember which category in Scratch encompasses inputs and outputs? So if you said the sensing category, you'd be exactly right. You'll see inside there that there's a block resembling what we would like to say in our program. It's the key space pressed question mark block. So let's drag that into our program. You'll notice that its hexagonal shape matches the blank space we're trying to fill. That's a good sign. So let's try and fit it into that blank space. You'll notice on the block that there is a drop-down menu which will open up the option for you to choose any of the keys on the computer's keyboard. So here we can see up arrow, down arrow, etc., and the whole alphabet of keys available on the keyboard. Our flowchart says to keep the space key pressed, so we're going to stick with this one. Okay, so we now have a program which says when green flag clicked, if the space key is pressed, then blank, else blank. So if we take a look at our flowchart, according to our flowchart, If the space key is pressed, i.e. that condition is true, then we want our sprite to move 10 steps and then say hello for 2 seconds. It's these instruction blocks which will fill the next blank space in our if and else statement block. Now you should be familiar with how to add these instruction blocks into this blank space. So take a minute to do that now. Okay, so you'll see that I've now got a computer program which says when the green flag is clicked, if the space key is pressed, then move 10 steps and say hello for 2 seconds. But what's going inside this blank space under else? Let's look back at the flowchart to see what we need. So if this condition, key space pressed, is evaluated as false, we want to play sound meow until done and change costume. So those are the instruction blocks that we need to add in the else blank space in Scratch. So let's go back into Scratch. So if we want our program to play a sound, it's obvious that we're going to find this block in the sound category. We click into that category and the first block we see says play sound meow until done. That sounds like what we need, doesn't it? So we drag that into our program like so and slot it into the blank space underneath else. But what if you didn't want to play the meow sound which appears automatically? You might want a different sound in your next program. To change the sound, we click on the drop-down menu. But you'll see that the only options available to us are the meow and the record. So record gives you the option to record your own sound. So if I click on that, you can see I can start recording. But I might not want to do that. So I exit that and I go back into the code. And you'll see that there is a sound tab above this instruction block menu here. So we click into that sounds tab and that opens up this window. At the bottom left corner of this window, you'll see a speaker icon with a plus sign. Very similar to the sprite plus icon and the backdrop plus icon. So if we click into that one, it says choose a sound and click it, and you'll see that it opens up a menu of sound files that are available to us on Scratch. You can see that there are loads of different ones to choose from and that they are categorized along the top here into, for example, animals, effects, loops, etc. This makes it easy to browse and select the appropriate file. So I'm going to go into the space category and I'm going to choose Alien Creek 1. So I click on that one. And what this process does is it allows you to add the sounds you want to use in your story, animation or game into your sounds library, which you can see I'm building up here on the left hand side of the screen. Again, very similar to the process of building up your sprites library, which we do here. and your backdrop library, which we do down here. So now I've added a sound file to my library. I want to go back to the programming window, so I do that by clicking on this code tab. And we're back into that window now. So when I go into this drop-down menu on the play sound block, the Alien Creek sound is available to me now. So I can use that one. So for example, if I clicked on it there, it's changed to play sound Alien Creek until done. Our flowchart says that we want to use the meow sound, so I'm going to keep that in there for now. Okay, so are we done here? No, not quite. So let's go back to the flowchart. So according to our flowchart, we need to add one more step, which is change costume in the else part of this if-else statement. So change costume. Do you have any ideas what this step is going to do in our Scratch program? Well, if we go back into Scratch, each sprite has a set of costumes. A costume is one out of possibly many frames or alternative appearances of a sprite. So sprites can change their look to any of its costumes. You'll see in my sprite library here that I've added 2 new sprites to illustrate this. I've added a fish and a ballerina. So if I select one of the sprites in the library, so at the moment I've got it on my cat sprite, and then I need to go to the costumes tab, which is next to the sounds tabs above the menu of instruction blocks. So if I click into that costumes tab, I can view the different costumes that are associated with my sprite. So here I can see that we have the default costume of the cat, and we also have an alternative view of the cat. So can you see that change? So if you were creating a story or an animation, then this would look like the cat was walking. Let's try a different one. If we click on to the fish in my sprite library here, I'll click fish. We can see that the fish can change its appearance entirely. So we've got an orange, a blue, a yellowy, and another yellow fish. And then again for the ballerina, we can see that the ballerina has multiple costumes, which makes it look like she's jumping as part of a dance. In this window, you can view the different costumes that your sprite already has, but you can also edit these costumes. So you can change the costume name, you can change the colour, the fill and the outline. You can add some text. I can add a text box and write something inside of it, and you'll see that it appears next to that costume view in my stage window. You can delete some of your costumes. So here, by just clicking on that dustbin icon, and that gets rid of the costume for you. You can even create and add new costumes for your sprite. So you can add to this costume library here. So let's try that. So let's go into our cat sprite. And I'm going to click on the plus. So you can see that it turns into choose a costume. So if I click on that, I can choose another costume for my cat. So I'm going to choose a flying cat costume, and I click on that, and you can see that it's appeared in my library now. So I'm happy with this, so I go back into my code. So according to the flow chart, what we need to add is a block which says change costume. This block to control the costume change can be found in the looks category because it controls the appearance of something in our program, whether that's an animation, a story or a game. So if we click into the looks category now, which of these blocks is going to allow us to change the sprite's costume in the program? So if you try and figure that out for a second. Okay, so the answer is that there are two blocks in there that we could use. We could either use the block that says next costume, just here. Switch costume to with a drop down menu. So the next costume block will force the program to switch the sprite to the next costume that appears in its library list each time. Whilst the switch costume to with a drop down menu block will switch your sprite's costume to the specified costume in the drop down menu. So I'm going to use the next costume. So that means that each time this program runs, our sprite will change to the next costume in its list. Okay, so our program looks good now. It resembles the flowchart that we've created. So we have when green flag is clicked, if the space key bar is pressed, then the sprite will move 10 steps and say hello for 2 seconds. Else, if the space key is not being pressed, the program will play the sound meow until done and change the costume of our sprite. So what I'm going to do first, before we try this, is I'm just going to remove the sprites that I added earlier to illustrate the costumes from our program. So I'm just going to click on that dustbin, and there we go. We just have our cat sprite like it was at the beginning. So what this is saying is that by pressing the green flag, we're going to trigger this program. So I'm going to click that green flag and we're going to see what happens. So, okay, so we all saw that once I did that, the program automatically played the meow sound and the sprite changed to its next costume in the list. That's good. That's a good sign because I didn't press the space key at all, and that's exactly what we wanted to happen. So what happened was, when I clicked on the green flag, the program evaluated whether the space key was being pressed. It decided that no, it wasn't being pressed, so it played the sound meow and switched to the next costume. So let's just try that one more time. But now I'm pressing the space key on my computer and nothing's happening. What should happen is that the sprite should move 10 steps and say hello for 2 seconds. Do you have any idea why this is happening? Take a minute to think about it and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so the reason why the program isn't responding to our input, i.e. pressing the space bar key is because we haven't told the program to evaluate the condition more than once. What I mean by that is we press the green flag and it goes straight into the if and else block, evaluates whether the spacebar is being pressed or not, and gives us our output dependent on whether that condition has been met or not. And that's exactly what we wanted to happen according to this flowchart that we created. So if we go back to scratch, how do we get the program to evaluate this condition more than once? Well, for that, we are going to need to put our instruction blocks into a forever loop block. And you'll remember from the last tutorial that we find the forever block again in the control category. And here it is, forever. So we can just drag that into our program, and you'll see that when I drag that below this when green flag clicked event block, it automatically puts the rest of my instructions inside the block. And that's exactly what I want to happen. So I just release, and now our instructions are in a repeat forever block, which means that when we press the green flag, the program is constantly looking to see whether the spacebar is being pressed or not. So let's give it a go. So I'm going to press the green flag to trigger the program. So what you should have seen there was that when I wasn't pressing the space key, the program evaluated this statement as false. And so it played the meow sound and changed the costume of my sprite. But when the computer received an input, so when the program received an input from me, i.e. clicking or pressing that space key bar, the sprite moved 10 steps and said hello for 2 seconds. So it's working perfectly now with the addition of that forever loop block. So now we've completed the first scratch exercise in the Using Selection in Computer Programs workbook. Can you execute the second example in the workbooks yourself? If you complete that exercise too, why not come up with your own program, making use of an if and else statement within it? What condition do you want to add? What do you want the program to do if that condition is met? And what do you want it to do if that condition is not met? So at some point in the Using Selection in Computer Programs workbook, there is a task for you to complete a flowchart including an if and else statement in MakeCode for Microbit. Your flowchart should look something like this. So we have a start terminal box again. Step 1, we go straight into the condition here. So it's asking whether button B is being pressed. Step 2 is the evaluation of that condition. So if it's true, yes, button B is being pressed. We have option 1 of the third step, which is to play middle G and then display a smiley. But if this condition is evaluated as false, i.e. button B is not being pressed, we have the second option of instructions, which would be to play low G and display a sad face. So there are a couple of things to note here in the flowcharts that are different between the scratch one that we've just executed and the make code for microbit one. Let's take a look. The big difference between these two is that in the Scratch program, on the left-hand side, we had a trigger block. So we had this input green flag clicked event block, which prompted the program to evaluate the state of the condition. Whilst in our make code flowchart on the right-hand side, we don't have the same trigger block. We go straight into the evaluation. So the program goes straight into asking whether button B is being pressed. Okay, so let's take a look at the make code program now. So if we're going to need an if and else statement straight away, where do we find this block in the make code editor? Well, we're going to find it in the logic category. So let's click into there. In the same way as the if and else statement added an element of control in the Scratch program, hence we found it in the control category, it could be said that we are applying a logical function to our program in make code, which is why it makes sense to find the if and else statement within that category. And here we can see it, the second one down in the menu. If true, then blank, else blank. So let's drag that into our program. Now, taking what we learned in Scratch about the condition being evaluated multiple times, where do we need to insert this if and else statement block? Of course, we need to add it into our forever loop block, so that whatever we fill these blank spaces with, the program is evaluating the condition multiple times over and over again. So we can get rid of this on start block by dropping it back into the menu there. Now let's take a minute to note how similarly set up the if and else statements are in these two editors. So on the left hand side we have the Scratch if and else statement, and on the right we have our make code for microbit one. And bearing in mind that these resources are mainly about showing you how easy it can be to apply the principles of what you've learned by programming in one editor to another. So with that in mind, let's return to the make code editor. So now you should be able to figure out how to build your program in make code too, based on what we've learned in Scratch. So what do we need to fill these blank spaces with? So let's have a look at the flowchart. So our flowchart says that we need to evaluate if button B is being pressed. So we're going to find that block which controls a button being pressed in the input category, because it's an input by us on the outside world, which is received by the computer or the program. So let's have a look. So in inputs, we have lots of options, but this one, button A is pressed, seems sensible, and exactly the same as in Scratch. We can see this hexagon shape, and if we click back inside there, we can see that this button A is pressed block is exactly the same shape, so it looks like this space here could accommodate the block that we're trying to insert into our program. So let's drag that in, and we'll try and replace that true statement with this button A pressed. So we'll drag it in there, and you can see that it's highlighted yellow, and we release it and we hear the noise which tells us that it's slotted into place. You'll notice that we've got the A and next to it a drop-down menu, which we can change to B according to our flowchart. So if I just hit on that arrow, we have the option of A, B, or A and B together. So we're going to stick with the B. So now what my program is saying is that forever it will check to see if button B is being pressed, and then at the moment we have a blank space, else a blank space. So what do we need to fill these blank spaces with? So let's go back and have a look in our flowchart. So if button B is being pressed, so the condition is true, then we want to play middle G and display a smiley. And if button B is not being pressed, so that would come under the else statement, then we want it to play low G and display a sad face. So based on what we've learned from scratch and what we know from the writing computer programs and algorithms video, you should be able to complete this program that we've started together in MakeCode. Okay, so you should have something that looks like this. So let's try it out. So we're going to click onto our virtual microbit or our simulator microbit and test our program. So what you should have seen happening there was that the program played low G and displayed the sad face until I pressed the B button, where the microbit played a middle G note and displayed a smiley face instead. So our program appears to be working perfectly, and we've managed to recreate the algorithm that we demonstrated with our flowchart in the workbooks. So now we've completed the first MakeCode exercise in the Using Selection in Computer Programs workbook. Can you execute the second example by yourself? If you complete that exercise too, why not come up with your own program, making use of an if and else statement? What condition do you want to add? And what do you want your microbit to do if the condition is met and if the condition is not met? It's up to you. So we've reached the end of our Using Selection in Computer Programs work package now. I hope this video has been useful to you and that you've built on your previously gained knowledge of programming in block editors. The next work package is on creating and using variables in computer programs, where you'll learn about variables and how they are created and used. I hope you'll join me on that video. In the meantime, check out the links to some useful resources in your workbooks and get programming.